Hi, my name is Dave Lockard. I live in York Springs, Pennsylvania, which is halfway between Harrisburg and Gettysburg. And this is my 1920 Packard truck. I bought it in '79, pulled it out of a barn. It was covered with pigeon poo. It did not run. It was basically a bare chassis. The Packard Motor Car Company made trucks from 1905 to 1923. And in the course of production, they made over 40,000 trucks. In World War I, the Army purchased 10,000 Packard trucks. By December of 1917, the railroads were clogged, so the government told Packard to drive your trucks from Detroit to the piers of Baltimore, which would take up to 20-some days. And a group of us restored a World War I Packard Army truck over a 17-year period. The truck had, well, like mine, no front brakes. That had a top speed of 17 mile an hour. A group of us restored the Army truck, and it's out in the America's Packard Museum in Dayton, Ohio. And I recently sold that in 1990, which is noted. And that's in the museum in Boise, Idaho. Yankee, Y-A-N-K-E, Automotive Museum in Boise, Idaho. And Dan Yankee said he had to have a Packard truck for his museum in Colorado.
So can you tell me a little bit about the specs of this truck?
Yeah, this is a 1.5-ton Packard. Basically, it's the smallest one that they made, and they made up to a 6.5-ton truck, which would weigh bare chassis about 11,000 pounds for just the chassis. So fortunately, I have a smaller one. In 1920 is when Packard came out with the steel wheels and the pneumatic tires. Prior to that, they were wooden spoke wheels with pneumatic tires.
What's this light here? Is that a light?
That's the tail light. That's basically acetylene that you would have to light. It doesn't do anything except shine. It's not a turn signal. I was extremely fortunate because the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, when they were selling air-filled tires back in 1917, they had a fleet of Mack, Packard, and White trucks. And they selected a Packard truck that they dug out of a swamp in Minnesota. I was in touch with that fellow and had told him I had parts from 2 trucks that I had rescued, junk trucks. And basically, he shared that with Goodyear, and then Goodyear got a hold of me because you can't find these parts. They wanted an engine because their engine was had a cracked one. And I ended up giving them the parts they needed, a worm drive rear end and an engine. They rebuilt my engine for free. Gave me these 4 tires, which are reproduction. They're 38 by 7 on a 24-inch wheel. So Goodyear rebuilt the engine, and a dear friend of mine custom made the starter for it. It's basically, I cheated. It's a Summit Racing race car starter motor. So when you hit it, the ignition, it's and it's running. There ain't none of this 6
You don't
volt.
have to crank it or anything, right?
It ain't this 6 volt stuff. So,
Do you have a specific connection to Packard trucks?
well, I'm supposed to be the Packard truck expert.
Uh-huh.
However, I clarify that because an X is somebody that can't do it anymore. And a spurt is a drip under pressure. So when I'm called an expert, I tell people to watch your mouth because I have 2 qualifications. But another dear friend of mine gave me the original Packard truck books, literature, and I'm literate. So I can claim those as 2 major.
So is this just for decoration now,
Well,
then?
that's just for decoration. It just sort of hangs around for decoration. It's a 4-cylinder Packard built engine. And that is one thing Packard was. It was a manufactured truck. They didn't buy their engines. You're going goo-goo eyes on me. Don't do that. It's not me. It's the car, right? Basically, when you are hand cranking, you need to retard the spark because when it catches, you don't want it to handle to come around and break your arm.
Uh-huh.
And ironically, the story of the starter being made Goes back to an incident where Henry Leland, who owned Cadillac, had a good friend and company that basically worked for National Cash Register, and he developed the first electric cash register.
Is that also in Dayton?
Yes.
Yeah.
But at any rate, when he heard that Carter was his name, made the Carter car. And a lady next to him stole the Cadillac. He got out, and in the process of cranking it, she did not retard the spark. The crank came around, and he eventually died of blood poisoning. So Henry Leland said, no one's going to die starting a Cadillac. Charles Kettering was the fellow that was charged with making an electric starter. And it was he and another fellow, John something, from National Cash Register that built the first. So in 1912, the Cadillac and the Carter car, which was bought by Cadillac, were the first vehicles in America with electric starters. So there we go.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you're about to open the hood here.
Do the other side. Carburetor side.
Well, I did say it looks like a vehicle like this would require some lessons on how to operate it. I noticed down here also a lever, the choke.
Right. So that's basically the engine. It's kind of a big sewer pipe for a carburetor. And nestled back there is the Summit Racing starter motor.
The thing that looks like it doesn't quite match.
It's painted it black.
Otherwise, is everything in there
Everything
about
is
100 years old?
Yeah,
104?
Yeah, which is about my age now.
And running fine?
Running fine.
At least the truck is.
Yeah.
I say make mention of the
Oh, yeah. So when you're starting it and you're cranking it, it has compression release. So you're not fighting compression by opening up.
Manually.
Right. And when it starts, it'll go pss, 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 pss. So then you get these shut and it's easier to start. Because on a winter day, they would actually build charcoal fires underneath where they put a blanket over it and still make it. Because they didn't have multiple viscosity oils. It was just basically oil.
Oil or no oil?
This does not have a cylinder head. The whole part here, I believe it's called end block, ENBLOC. Thereby, this whole part has to be lifted off the pistons. Top speed of 30 mile an hour. No front brakes. And when you put the brakes on, it's a clamp on the drive shaft.
Like a bicycle.
Yeah, you're like tickling this rotating drum. The emergency brake here is on your rear drums.
Yes?
Yes, it's on the rear drums.
Oh, I see.
Said the blind man, and he picked up his hammer and saw.
Is this a color they would have come?
Yeah,
standard?
This is gray with black trim.
And what's this?
That's the battery box.
A very fancy battery box.
Well, as a matter of fact, on the truck as it came out of the factory, it only had the battery to provide up in the column. There's positions here for start, run, and stop. To start, there's exciter coils in here that send a hotter spark to your spark plugs. And that's the only purpose for that battery box, is to provide that spark.
So down here, accelerator?
Yeah.
And brake still, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and then this is there's a manual override for the
hand throttle.
Yeah, so it's sort of a mechanical cruise control, but very basic.
And is that a gear shift, or what's the tall?
You would have the throttle here, which you can see actuate down below there at the carburetor. You've got the choke up here, or the air-fuel mixture. Left leans it out, right adds gas, which you can also see actuate down at the carburetor.
So in short, you have to take weather into account.
Sometimes, yeah. Cold starts, warm starts, things of that nature. And then you've got your timing advance and retard to the left that would control that.
Now this is your ignition. For you have run, you have start, and stop. So, and that's when basically the impulse comes to this that goes to the spark plugs when you're firing it up. So it's a hot spark. As soon as you start it, you turn it to run, and now it's running, so you don't have to draw from the battery.
So I was right in saying this requires some lessons before you drive it for the
one or
first time.
two. One or two.
I know what this is. That I learned that part. Why this particular truck? What's the draw for you?
Well, basically the draw was I've had a number of Packard cars, basically the straight eights and some V8s, and didn't run into a whole lot of guys in the Packard Club that had trucks. Matter of fact, none. And then friends told me about parts that I found in Lidditz, Pennsylvania, and was able to finish, well, with the help of Goodyear, my truck, and then started on a couple more. So I just thought the Army truck had to be different. You know, my wife said, "When does this end?" And I said, when the coroner comes up and said, "He's dead."
Well, it's mostly wooden, so I mean.
Well, I worry about termites, huh? It's not so much rust. Before I went in the Navy, I worked for a fellow that had been a World War I cook behind an Army horse-drawn wagon. With his stories, when I got back from the Navy in '70, he would tell me about being at the front and cooking for the troops. And that was my initial inspiration for World War I. Plus, my next door neighbor in 1916 was a volunteer to the American Ambulance Force in France that would drive to the front, retrieve wounded French, take them back to the hospital. And the gentleman that I bought this from was a fellow by the name of Ralph Gary. And Ralph Gary had a brother, Edward, who was killed in World War I 6 days before the war ended. And he bought this truck in memory of his brother. And Ralph never had the truck running. I got it running, and I think he was like 94, and he rode in the truck. And it was an epiphany for him. And it made me feel good. Anybody mentions Packard trucks, and
I was going to say, what about the cook that, did he not cook for the president at the time?
Oh, yeah. Well, this fellow's name was Joseph Conti, and they kept him after World War I was over, and he ended up being part of the occupation force. And he cooked several banquets during the Treaty of Versailles for President Woodrow Wilson. So this guy was a walking history book, but he was Italian, and his garlic breath, it could melt a Sherman tank. I mean, it was hideous. But the stories in it would tell you. To get some more detail, these two frame pictures, get them close up, because this talks about the tires that they had. I should bring this up for you.
I guess I could just read it out loud. Although automobiles traveled on air-filled or pneumatic tires since the late 1800s, air-filled tires could not tolerate the weight of heavy trucks. Starting in the early 1900s.
I got a phone call in 2007 from a gentleman in Belgrade, Serbia, by the name of Vojan Sebček, and I screwed his name up. And he said that his friend has a Packard truck that was given to the Serbian army after World War I. And in doing so, he had seen on the internet that there's pictures of all my trucks. I didn't do it. I have a flip phone. Did I tell you? I remember I told you. So at any rate, he said, "May I come over from Belgrade and take pictures of your trucks?" So my wife said, "Who's that on the phone?" I said, it's a guy who used to be Yugoslavia. It used to be a communist country, but he likes trucks, so he's got to be cool. So he came over, and I ended up giving him all the parts that he needed. I said, free on board. And his friend who didn't speak English came back in 2010 for Hershey, and I gave him some more parts. The upshot is I got a telephone call, and they said, "We would like to send you a car. Would you want a Trabant," which was an East German piece of garbage, or would you like a Zastava? And a Zastava is a Fiat 600 made under license in Yugoslavia from 1985. 1985, from 55 to 85. And he sent me a fully restored 79 Zastava as a thank you for all the parts. that won a senior at Hershey. It's 25 horsepower. He's driven it.
That's the wow factor.
I enjoy taking it out. I enjoy people coming up and sitting in it and explaining a little bit about the history.